Uh, and we're live. It's Tuesday, July 20th, 5:02 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have Cecilia, Kang, and Sheera Frenkel and their new book, An Ugly Truth. And so excited to talk about this with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much for having us. And Sheera will be there really soon. Okay.
Oh, yeah. We're a very low-key audience. You're totally fine.
Low-key. My publicist would kill me if I didn't do this.
Oh, no,
And
please.
here it is.
I'm going to take a screenshot. Hold on. No, hold it up again.
And here it is. Oh, actually, maybe I should do this.
Oh, yeah, do that. Did you plan that?
I like that.
That's pretty great. So I guess, first of all, I'm kind of really curious, like, how has it been so far? Like, how I feel like the reaction has been tremendous. In an age where I kind of feel like you had a lot to come, like there are a lot of books out there about big tech.
Yes, and according to Facebook, there are 367 books about Facebook, and ours is just one of too many and has nothing new, is what they say. So I can't remember reading more than maybe a handful, but there's some might be, I don't know, like all the iterations of Facebook for Dummies. I don't know. That's a big number.
Yeah, I mean, so when you started researching this, was there like a story in particular that you were kind of a thread that you were interested in pulling? Or was it that is there something that you and Sheera stumbled on together? Like, how did you put it, how did it all happen? Oh, Sheera's here.
Yeah, well, awesome.
But go ahead.
Yeah, so, this came from an investigation that we did in 2018, the end of 2018, which was a real sort of inside Facebook kind of investigation on essentially like what the heck is happening at this company, like what's really happening at this company. And that was actually the animating question our editor started with. And we published that story called Delay, Deny, and Deflect in the Times. Hey, Sheera. And we just felt like there was so much more, like there was so much interest in that story. And it was really clear that there was real hunger to understand Facebook more beyond like the public relations machine allows the public to understand it. And so we felt like we had cracked open the door by a couple of toes, but there was so much more. And there was a lot also on the cutting room floor from that story. We just thought, God, we're so eager for people to know about this stuff. And then as far as storylines go, we really wanted people we think it's really important for people to understand the business. Like this audience gets it, and understanding the business model, but just all Facebook users, we wanted everybody to have that kind of education. And we really wanted people to understand the technology, but also the culture and the leadership that's making these decisions. So, I mean, it was kind of a plateful actually of ambitions, but we thought, Facebook deserved a book. It deserved sort of this definitive sort of if you think Facebook, this is actually what Facebook really is what we're trying to tackle.
And how is it different from what you had originally perceived it to be?
Well, I think sometimes as a reporter, when you start researching something, you want to dig in and discover that there was some grand scheme or design behind the thinking, that there was some plan that you've uprooted or uncovered. And I think we were really surprised that a lot of the times, if not all of the times, Facebook was really making decisions ad hoc. As problems arose, there was a group of people in a room, most of them not really experts in whatever it was that they were tackling. And they were making these calls on the fly. And then kind of the policy often came afterwards, right? Like, oh, well, Trump's posted this thing. We've got to really react to it quickly. Oh, there's a carve out because he's an elected officials, and elected officials are important. And I don't know, sometimes as a reporter, you imagine there's this deeper, really meaningful discussion or some expertise that was brought in that you just don't know about that's governing these ideas. And you discover no, it was just kind of a on the spot move. And then afterwards on phone calls with journalists like ourselves, they're justifying it and they're coming up with policies.
I would just add real fast that, I'm just going to add what we did take away though, and I'm sort of flash forwarding, is that in fact, this there are a lot of ad hoc decisions, but embedded and designed into the technology and into the business model are really basic things that have led to a lot of these problems. In other words, like we thought this was kind of a Frankenstein story, like, oh God, a machine that's completely like run away from its creators. But actually, we realized that that's not the case at all, and that the problems that we've seen surface over the last 4 to 5 years are the direct result of decisions made to create this business model that's all about attention and seeping up data and creating profits from it, and the technology that really prioritizes engagement. And those two things, like those two sort of parallel tracks running so hard and never slowing down, have directly resulted. There's a through line. It's directly resulted in a lot of things that we see today.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say that from my interviews and my conversations with people in the company, this is also like the ad hoc decision making thing is something that I have written about extensively, and I completely agree with you. Yeah. People put so much intentionality on these decisions, especially back in the day. They used to put and especially back in the day, they were even more just putting out fires than maybe they even are now. But they're still just like incredibly ad hoc. And then there's like this post hoc rationalization. So I don't know. It's like, exactly. I thought that this was there. And so, and I think that this is in part what I don't know if you had had time to like really read it or look at it with the bounce back that the oversight board gave back to Facebook after the Trump decision. But this was kind of that discussion, which was like, you're making this up as you go along, and if you don't have a real rule of law, we can't tell you whether or not this is actually something that you're doing correctly or not, because you haven't committed yourself to a system of rules yet. Does that make sense? And so it's just kind of
totally. Yeah.
So I love that this is something that you're taking away from the book. But tell me just a little bit more about the the business model. We've got kind of Shoshana Zuboff's like surveillance capitalism type of idea, and everyone's at this point very familiar with targeted advertising type of notions. But like, how does your kind of conception of the business model differ from that, or is it kind of just like reiterating some of those ideas?
Well, I think that Shoshana, by the way, is so brilliant, and we quote her a few times in our book, and we talk to her. I think she had her finger on the nose on that one. It's just, I think it's really important for people to understand what they created as far as the business model, and it may not seem particularly inventive today, but at the time it was pretty genius, which was, we have in the book this scene where Sheryl Sandberg meets with the top executives when she first joins Facebook. Mark is gone on vacation, and this is probably a well-known story at this point, but she basically articulates what Facebook had that was unique and what they would do that was unique. And I think arguably some people say it was a more pernicious advancement of behavioral advertising that had existed for many, many years. And that was that they knew that inside Facebook, they contained inside so much data, and that people were volunteering data, and they had people were doing this with their real identities. And so they had such a 360-degree view of every single user. And that was super valuable to advertisers, because they could tell advertisers, like, look, like Google's great. And what I built at Google is great in that when you're really close to buying something, I can run an auction at Google behind the scenes to help you, brands, figure out, okay, this person wants to buy fishing gear. 10 companies bid on it right now. What she did and what Facebook built was this idea, a different kind of a spin on that, a different kind of model that was taking all this data that we just mentioned at Facebook, and to tell brands, look, from all of this, you can persuade minds. You can tell people, and you can find the people who may not know necessarily that they want to go fishing and they want to buy that rod and that hat and those boots, rubber boots, but we can figure out who those people might be and give that data to you for you to target advertising. It was in many ways a broader sort of attack when it comes to, when I mean attack, but like targeting of people, because it's not based, it's taking such a full view of individuals. The ads are I mean, they should be scrutinized as well, their model. But it's different. And I think that what this did was it created this real cycle within Facebook where they could not have enough data about their users, because the more insight that they could provide advertisers about their users, the more value they had to offer to advertisers, the more money they could make.
I want to add one thing, which is I think Shoshana did such a brilliant job in that book of laying out the business model. And we obviously at various times in the book touch on it. One thing we wanted to do that was different was take you into, into moments where that becomes important. So Trump running for office and why he was able to really capitalize on Facebook's algorithms and what they promote and get to the top of the newsfeed and be in the groups that are recommended. And to us, that's something that people hadn't done in book form before, to point out, people have said that Facebook made Trump, but let's point out to decisions along the way during Trump's campaign and Trump's presidency, where his really extreme positions are amplified by Facebook's algorithms. And in real time, this really emotive content, whether you agree with it or not, it's eliciting a response, which is therefore keeping you on the platform longer. Sorry, my light keeps falling. Which is therefore getting you, to give them more data, take that train of thought downwind. That for us was really important to show how we all fell subject to it over the last 4 years.
Okay. Just one point I would like a little clarification on, and I apologize. But it's just more of are we more concerned about the engagement or the push for engagement, since I believe you guys have spoken before that this was always at the core of Mark Zuckerberg's vision for the platform? And are we more concerned of that because of the predictive functions that it's going to serve in terms of the wholesale, whole body gathering of the user itself, or is it just more about the commoditization of that in how it's delivered to the user through ads?
I think, I don't know, for myself personally, I think that the experience, not so much the ads, but the experience it has on the user, where it pushes you to on Facebook, felt more concerning. And here I'm thinking really specifically of things like our Myanmar chapter and what that said about human behavior. And Myanmar, I keep going back to that because that's a perfect case study of a worst case scenario, where you have no government resources or government agencies that are pushing out true information. You have no established news sources that are providing a fact check against what's online. And so in an environment where the only thing governing what people see is the Facebook algorithm, the worst rises to the top and the most inflammatory rises to the top. And then people are pushed towards really incendiary beliefs. To me, what that says about democracy, not just in Myanmar, but in India, the Philippines, so many other countries where we're seeing similar things happen, is fascinating and really worthy of study. I think the ads are a separate thing, right? Like how the targeted ads work and all that. But in terms of harm to society, I would perhaps, I would love to see an academic study. And I know there's been some, but I will put this differently. I could consume endless academic studies about how this drives polarization.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, that that's going to be feasible? Because, I mean, from what I understood, Facebook started to limit the amount of access they're giving to academics. And previously they had at least some limited access.
Yes, I was going to say, us two over here, hard crowd tangle.
Yeah.
Got in there while I could get in there.
Yeah, it's no, I mean, it's a great, I mean, I will remind everyone, and as a journalist I often say this in interviews, that let's all remember that moment in 2018 where they were like, we're all about transparency, all the future elections are going to be different because we're inviting in the academics and we're inviting in the journalists and we're going to give as much data as possible. And let's remember that, what are they called? Kate, you'll remember this better than I will, the thing that they ran with all the academics where they were going to hand out all this data.
Social Science 1. Yeah.
Yes. Is that still, what is going on with that?
It's still going. It's not what it was originally supposed to be, but it's still going, and it's been marginally successful. But it had its. Actually, that'd be a good story. You should go and dig into what happened to that. But there's it was at the exact same time I was in there, and you were right. It was this moment of transparency, and this moment of also let me tell you, that was thankless. I went and did spend. Who the hell wants to spend 9 months of their life at Facebook? I just missed my dog and
it was worth
my partner.
Kate.
Yeah,
the
kind of.
It was worth it. Your
work's been your work's been great, and it's unique, and it's so rare that those windows open. And so I think it's amazing that academics got in there in that brief window of time when they could. I remember going to a dinner for Social Science One when they launched it, and Elliot Schrage was at the dinner. I was out in Stanford, and I remember saying to him, like, you know, like, really though, like, how long are you going to keep this going, and how much are you going to give over? And he said, "This is the new Facebook, Sheera. This is what we do now. We want."
And then he left 5 months later.
Right, and then he left.
But I mean, so it's funny. Okay, so this is actually going to tie really well into the joke that I just made on Twitter. Says everyone ever. Oh. But it was Jeff Bezos saying the quote of, like, telling all of the Amazon employees and all of the people who buy from Amazon, thanking them because I couldn't have done this, shooting myself all this money into space and on a giant penis without you. Thank you so much. And I was just like, my tweet was just like, but you, and then, like, and I think the New York Times headline was like, and criticism erupts around Bezos doing this, and I said, like, my tweet was like, but you said you wanted more transparency. Well, at the end of the day, the transparency is that it's all capitalism. And so that's your problem, or not, depending on whether or not, you know. So I'm kind of curious. I have not spent as much time at all in the company with like what I call the C-suite, or like the top kind of people, mostly because I'm really interested in, like, how the everyday day-to-day decisions get made and the system kind of works. And I'm kind of someone who thinks that the factory floor reveals a lot about the executive suite ultimately. But I increasingly have seen, I just have this impression that it's a very sharp delta between those two Facebooks. I wonder if you guys have the same kind of feeling from your sources or people that you talk to in the company.
That, like, specifically what? That the leadership is, like, sort of the leadership
versus like the rest of the company.
The rest of them,
varied.
Definitely, completely. It's well, I think that this was something we really spool out in the book and needs to be understood, is how it functions within, and it's absolutely a court inside. And what we show is that Mark really values loyalty, and he surrounds himself by people who are often like him. They have very similar backgrounds and life experiences. Likewise with Sheryl Sandberg, she surrounds herself with people who she feels like she can really trust. She also hires a lot of people on her own, on the outside, political consultants who advise her on every single decision, and who are basically with her in a, you know, one phone call away all day long. I think what we found is that's contributed to a couple of things: groupthink among the top leaders, as well as a real difficulty for the opinions of people on sort of the rank and file to surface up. And, you know, what's really important is that Facebook actually has Q&As and all hands and all these, like, meetings where employees can at least ostensibly reach Mark and Sheryl and voice their concerns. The PR staff controls that quite a bit, the Q&A, first of all, but they often don't listen to what's happening in these meetings. I think when we talk to leaders inside, they will even themselves say that it's incredibly unusual to have two people there at the helm of this company as long as they have been. And it's really unusual to have a founder there for 17 years who's still there making, like, so many crucial decisions, and even, like, lots of decisions, you know, like, you have a lot of founders who kind of step away for a little while. And not for him, and not with that.
Do you remember that moment where I called you? I had just finished interviewing somebody who had known Mark for a really long time, and Cecilia and I wondered, like, what are Mark's big thoughts on free speech? Like, what books is he reading? Who's in? And I remember, remember I called. I think I was still in my car. I was just like, I was so stunned by this person I had just spoken to, and I called Cecilia up, and I was like, he doesn't read. And she was like, what are you talking? And I said, I just, you know, this person, like, remembers him really well. He's not a reader. Like, he'll read history. He's interested in the Roman Empire. He's interested in very specific technology books. But, they called very clearly from college and from his years immediately afterwards that he would openly tout the fact that he was not a reader. And that even at Facebook, that year where he spent reading books stood out to some people who knew him, because he was not a person who generally did spend a lot of time reading books and thinking about these things in a really deep and meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just so struck by the parallels between the C-suite's operation and how they're organizing themselves into an environment where they're finding like minds, and the individual users algorithm pushing them towards other like-minded people.
Such a great point.
So is there any way that you think that the problem can't be solved because they can't recognize it?
Or that like human instinct always pushes us to find similar people, or people who like agree with us.
Yeah, I mean, if they put their thumb on the scale and try to, get strangers to meet each other or whatever, that would be like, that's not the kind of business they want to be in. I mean, groups are popular. Groups are really popular, and so are pages. And so people engage so much more when you're with like-minded people, and you feed off of each other. And oftentimes that's when one idea becomes distilled and leads into something really dangerous, like Stop the Steal. It's again, like engagement. If that's your North Star, those are the kinds of technology decisions you're going to make. I mean, that said, like all of these are not like all one-sided. There are some lovely groups out there. I love this running group that I'm part of, in suburban DC. We don't talk about like conspiracy theories or the vaccine or anything like that. We just talk about running. But it's like there are some benefits, but they often, and this is sort of the crux of the book, they often make decisions where they weigh the costs and benefits. And when it's engagement and growth, that's, and that's why this book was called An Ugly Truth. It's based off of that Bosworth memo on these trade-offs. It's the growth that always comes first. And, the euphemism for them is connecting the world, but really that's growth in profits and in user numbers.
Yeah. I remember I think it was in like 2015, one of my former content moderation expert had been like, making the world more open and connected is actually just a very neutral phrase. Like if you think about it, it is not necessarily a good thing. Like, the fact that it's weird that this was like how how they picked the mission, but it's not actually like maybe like for the good, like even, and so it's I think that's like a really excellent point.
Have you seen the interview with, I talk about this often and I geek out on it, but where Yuval Noah Harari is doing a Q&A with Mark Zuckerberg? I don't know if anyone here has watched that. It was part of Zuckerberg's thing last year where he was trying to do like one-on-one conversations with people.
Oh yeah. Okay. And, I must have missed this one.
No, I think everyone did except for me because I obsessively watch all things, but there was one really jarring moment where Yuval says to him, he says to Yuval, but our mission of connecting the world, and Yuval's like, but why is that good? Like, why you're predicating your entire business on the idea that it's good for the entire world to be connected, and I'm not sure I agree with that. And the look on Mark's face, because I think Mark is someone who probably really admires Yuval Noah Harari, as many in Silicon Valley do, and the look on his face when Yuval says that is just like stunned. And you can see it's because people he considers, I think probably his intellectual equals that surround him at Facebook, really do reiterate this idea that that this is a holy mission of theirs, really, and that it will benefit the world. And they can certainly, Sandberg loves to draw on examples of, isolated cases of women in India who launch a business and family members who haven't talked in years. But in all that, as we all know, is that good? Do we all need to be connected through a platform like Facebook?
Go ahead, Cecilia.
Oh no, I just love what you said about how it's neutral, because I think that a lot of the things that you hear from Mark Zuckerberg, and let's be clear, like the book is really showing Mark progressively making more of these decisions and his involvement on speech and all these other things. What's not asked is that second clause of the sentence, which is for what, and for what? It's like, I believe in full and free expression, And, what, for what? For a healthy democracy? For a what? And then there's not that kind of second part of that idea to make it a complete thought, and then decisions filtering from that second thought, which I think is really important for people to think about. I mean, I think that in general, it sounds well and good to want to connect the world, like you said, it's neutral, and to let expression be, as free as possible. Except that I don't think that it's such a basic slogan. Like, it's so basic in that sort of slang way. You know what I mean? It's just not sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, and they changed it. I mean, and so it's not, so it's not that. So, and I think for all of the reasons that we're now discussing, I mean, because some people that were a little bit more savvy decided to that wasn't the best, branding going forward. I'm really curious what you make of kind of. You mentioned that this is a unique company and that Mark is the founder and he's still in charge. You mentioned how close he and Sheera are, all the loyalty of everyone else, and like kind of the, that kind of idea. The other thing that you haven't mentioned, and I'm curious what you think, is like the failure to fire people when things go really bad. There has been this they have been in the reputational toilet for 5-6 years, and no one's head has been on the chopping block. Like, this is very rare for companies. Like, companies typically have a Cambridge Analytica and someone stands up and says, it was my fault, whether it was theirs or not, and then leaves, right? And then the company can move forward and go on. And that has never happened at Facebook. And in fact, I've heard that it is like known as like the culture of the top 100 people are like not fireable.
But this goes to what you said earlier about really there being the upper echelon and everyone else, because at the rest of Facebook, people get fired all the time. They've got a very short leash of mistakes that they can make before they let go. But yes, at the top, it is absolutely. I mean, I think the problem is that most of those mistakes were Mark's. And, we have a moment in our book, a scene in our book where after Cambridge Analytica, he screams at Cheryl and he gets really mad at her for her handling of Cambridge Analytica. But, if you really think about Cambridge Analytica, that was a product problem. That Cambridge Analytica happened because Facebook was giving out data to all of these partners and not keeping track of that. All happened on Mark's side of the company. So, his anger at Sandberg for not handling the press or whatever, the New York Times story, and not getting, I don't know what he expected her to do in that situation. The New York Times reporters had been shown something incredibly egregious, and the Guardian reporter. You could make the same argument for Russian election interference. Like, why did that happen? Well, it wasn't a policy problem. It was a product problem. And no one, Zuckerberg is at the top of that product chain, and he's created a system where he obviously can't be fired. He's never going to, I shouldn't say never, but we don't see him anytime soon stepping down. So yes, other than Elliot Trigg, who kind of fell on his own sword for Sandberg, as you mentioned earlier, and left the company a couple of years ago.
But he didn't leave. This, right?
He hung around and
for a long time, he was like a shadow figure. He was. Everybody saw him in the office just hanging out.
I know. He left his post. There was a goodbye, and then he stuck around for another year as head of special projects, which was nothing or something like that.
It was Social Science 1, and then it was
but he wasn't even involved in anyways. It was just it was crazy. It was very weird.
Of the C-suite.
Yes, exactly.
Keep making millions of dollars and keep your title and then leave when you feel like it. I think what's sad is not only has there not been anyone's head on the chopping block, a moment of real corporate responsibility to say, actually, this was a problem. The opposite has happened, where the people who have been the whistleblowers, as we show in our book, people who have stood up and tried to change things culturally and tried to say when things are going off the rails, they've left or been pushed out. And obviously I'm thinking about everyone from Alex Stamos to the founders of WhatsApp, the founders of Instagram. These are people that repeatedly tried to sound alarms internally and are no longer there.
Yeah.
So when you speak about it as a product problem and the fact that whistleblowers are often penalized and organically or not so organically pushed out or set aside, do we think that this is something that would be best suited to be would it be best remedied by regulation from the exterior? Because so many lay people, especially, and law people, are very unfamiliar with how the company actually works. They're unfamiliar with how the structure of a tech company is different from one to the other, which they are extremely different, what the goals are, and all these different things. So bringing to light the book and all these different like information, what would you see as being the best mechanism? Is it users just stop using it and withdrawing their engagement until policies change, or is it actual regulation?
Oh, yeah, I have so many answers to that question.
Sorry, that was long-winded.
That's a multi-pronged question, but good ones. I think the most significant change will probably come from the outside if the structure remains as it is, because Mark Zuckerberg is basically the majority shareholder and he has final say in everything, and there's nobody really that checks him, neither the board nor shareholders or other executives, and there's not a lot of pushback inside. People are in fact afraid. Even Sheryl Sandberg, who was supposed to be the countervailing force there, knows her limits and pushing back with him on even the most egregious things. So on regulation, I do think that there's a lot of energy, and I follow both of you guys like on Twitter and on your papers and everything, and like I think that you guys have made really good points, and I think you'd agree that there's a lot of really bad regulatory ideas out there too. So it's like finding the right one and adjusting to every model and not totally squashing potential newcomers is like really tricky. Right now in Washington, there's like this idea that antitrust could be a panacea for everything that's bad with tech, and I think that there's some really reasonable antitrust remedies and updates that could be made legislatively, but gosh, some of them are just like, I think some people feel like it's just too much. I do think that there's one thing, and I've sort of evolved my thinking, Sheera, in all of our interviews, that I think there can be one very significant internal change that I think will appear to that this audience can resonate, that will resonate with this audience, which is that there needs to be policy people working more closely with the product people, and that just doesn't exist, and
Yes.
It's just like one of those things where it's like people are making products and policy people, like I had one person tell me, like, we were trying to tell them, this is like, you need, and I know this is a catchphrase, but privacy by design on this particular thing. And the product people are like, get the fuck out. Like my managers aren't telling me that. I'm sorry, audience, but it's just like that's
everyone swears in lieu of fun. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
Encouraged.
And the more I thought about it, like when we talk about deltas, like that's such a big one within Facebook, where the policy people, the people who are the experts on issues like privacy and competition and
cybersecurity.
They're not embedded. In fact, people still kind of turn their nose up at those people. Like if you're not like the product guys, the product people, guys and gals, then you are kind of considered second class. And I don't think that's changed much. That was definitely true in the earliest days. I don't think that's changed much either. So that's my new line of thinking for this particular audience. And by the way, I love the chat on the side. I feel like I
know we have an amazing, really brilliant audience. We're gonna, just to warn you, I'm gonna start bringing a couple people in for questions. They've asked questions in the Q&A, and we bring them in to ask them. But I just want to say, Cecilia, that's first of all, I completely agree, and I know that we've been talking a little bit. I've been talking to you just over DMs and stuff about some of the stuff coming out of the FTC and with Lena Khan, who was a classmate of mine at Yale. And so we were there. Yeah. So we're kind of there at the same time. Her note that made all of these kind of waves in the Yale Law Journal is excellent, but it is excellent as far as in describing the problem of Amazon.
Yes, one company.
And that is and this has been extrapolated and kind of, I don't know if I want to say reduced into, but simplified into, over-broadened, whatever the hell, into antitrust can solve big tech. That's it. As you said, the silver bullet. And it just no. There's a lot of problems that might actually, and I think content moderation is a huge one, that will get a lot worse if you start busting up companies that spend a lot of resources and time and money and human capital basically doing thoughtful human review of content moderation. They're just not going to do it anymore. And you'll get massive amounts of censorship and massive amounts of kind of spam and other types of things. So that is something that I'm writing about now, but that'll be, I think, but I love and the other thing that I'm writing about is kind of interoperability and like the idea that you talked about, which is that it's Bruce Schneier, who is a cybersecurity expert and really wonderful, has this line that's like policy, like technologists need to understand that they're capable, that they are actually building worlds, and policymakers need to realize that technologists are capable of building worlds. And I think that it's kind of like that both don't fully like appreciate the scale of what the other is doing, and but they should be talking to each other. And so I think that's a really great idea.
Just to add one quick point to Cecilia, as opposed to what we kept hearing, which is that they're always at odds with each other, and there's a lot of animosity between the policy and the product people at a company like Facebook. And the early, since we can swear, I can say is, we have in the book, one of the early slogans of the product engineers is "fuck it, ship it." And it's because they have these quotas of what they've got to ship, and they've got to do it quickly, and they've got to hit it, and a certain number of people have to use it, and that governs their thinking. And when a policy person comes in and hears "fuck it, ship it," that's not time for like a thoughtful discussion on whether that feature is going to,
They're just going to come in and then I'm going to minimize them. Sorry, that's how it works. But that's. I've been partnered with with a software engineer for the last 14 years, and this is it's literally one of the reasons I feel like I understand this so intuitively is because of that. It's just
totally.
Yeah. It's completely true. I totally
And you can
agree.
understand from an engineer's perspective where they're like, well, my manager wants us out in the wild by Friday, and, they don't have time for an in-depth policy meeting to talk about worst case scenarios of how a product gets used, because that's not built into what, into their job description or into what their managers require of them.
Or what could go possibly wrong with having everything geotagged? What could possibly go wrong? It's just another feature.
And that's sorry, but one last thing. I know you want to get to questions, but every step of this book, Cecilia and I asked, did anyone say what can go wrong?
Yeah.
Did anyone in the room say, how does this get misused? What can go wrong? And we must have asked in some of these meetings, I think we almost interviewed every single person that was in the meeting. No one said it. No one voiced it. No one thought it. It wasn't even part of a follow-up email discussion of what's the worst that can happen.
Is that because there's a utopian view of the product, or just efficiency was at stake?
Both. I think it's just not. Sorry, Cecilia, please go.
Yeah. I mean, all can be true. You can have a utopian view of your role in the world, but also really, really want to build something that's big and impactful and profitable, and and be intensely competitive about it. I think all can be true. And when we talk to a lot of people who are really close to Cheryl and Mark, they would say that, especially Mark, he really believes it. But it's kind of one of those things where it's I can't get in his head and psychoanalyze him, but it's kind of nice to believe in that too, some of the utopian stuff.
Well, I wish that I actually think that there is so much more well-intentioned idiots kind of wandering around Facebook than we think. And I think a lot less of it actually, Mark Zuckerberg, someone said to me at a panel I was on once just recently that was well, it's only because Mark Zuckerberg wants to put more money in his bank. I'm Mark Zuckerberg does not need more money in his bank account. There is no way that any decision that Mark makes anymore is about dollar bills. Everything is about his legacy for his kids. Yes. And basically trying to redeem himself in some type of way. That is the only thing that man has left. That's it. And I really believe that. And I think that's so it's it's capitalism, right? But it is at a certain point you have enough money and it's boring, and so you have to do something else. And I think that what's really interesting is there's also, we've talked about kind of the factory floor, and we talked about the C-suite, but there's a really interesting level of people and how they sell each other out and kind of throw each other under the bus in all of these major companies, trying to make their way into that echelon. And then there's people who join the company and just honest to God want to do the right thing. They look at it like government service. They think that this is the way to make the world a better place. And I wish that there was more conversation around some of that, because I do feel like it's, there's a lot of good people that are really there for really noble reasons, and maybe like a little Pollyanna, but like thinking they could change everything. But I mean, you could say the same about, yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, Sheera can talk about this. I think the security team's a good example of people who come from government, NSA, CIA, other places, real experts in their field. And number one, they see Facebook as like a place where actually they can do so much more than they can with the government, because Facebook is just so, the reach is just so broad, and they have so much access into like what people are doing.
Yes.
Sheera can talk a little if you want. I don't know if you want to go to questions, but about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of privacy and security folks that have joined the company that are experts in their field, and they say, I mean, this kind of touches on something you said earlier, which is, if there's anyone that's going to make it better, it's going to be $1 trillion company. They can afford to make things better. They can afford to be the ones setting the bar and setting a standard for everyone else to follow. And yes, you do see security people who came from the NSA and other intelligence agencies who say, I never had this level of visibility when I was at the NSA. I never could understand foreign adversaries the way I can now. And that's incredibly powerful and alluring. And I do think they believe that they are making a difference. I will say that I've noticed there seems to be like a certain burnout rate among them, somewhere between like 4 and 5 years, where they hit a wall. Many of them hit a wall around that time, and they sort of can't cope with some of the company's policy decisions that they just feel like make their jobs impossible. I'm thinking really specifically about like QAnon and all the flip-flopping that happened on what to do over QAnon last year. I remember speaking to a security person who was like, I'm sitting in a meeting. We've agreed that we need to take down QAnon, but because we're afraid that it's going to upset the right, we now have to find a bunch of Antifa groups that we can take down and announce in the same PR announcement so that we don't get accused of being one-sided. And I was like, wait, you're equating QAnon and Antifa? And he was like, well, I'm not, but the PR team is, because they need to feel like they're speaking to the left and the right at the same time, and it's all very political. And now QAnon gets to live on our platform for another like 2 to 3 weeks while we come up with an Antifa list. And I just remembered how upset this person sounded, and in general, like the security team who had worked so hard on this, how just, how disheartening that was.
Yep.
It feels like the least neutral neutrality I've ever heard of.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like, no, absolutely. Well said. I think that I have this argument with conservative people who claim like conservative bias all the time. I'm like, no, they had rules. And then you're like a huge chunk of your party went all the way over here. And like, it was like the rule didn't change. This just, all of this language got so much more extreme. And I think that that's something that like, I think sensible people understand. And it's just kind of, it's unfortunately circling like the bowl right now for a while. Tony Cava is a baby penguin.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
It's been a long time since I've been on, so been a long time since I've been able to watch. So hello, everyone.
We missed you, Tony.
Aw, that's sweet. I missed you all too. I have a question. I'm going to just try to wing it. But I'm wondering, are there any groups? Is there a threshold below which a group is so small that it's not worth it to Facebook to try to attract the clicks and eyeballs and to try to gather and commodify their data and then sell it? Or is it literally like, no matter how small, how kooky, how much the political downside would be to gathering a group's information, they're just going to gather it because that's what they do?
When you say groups, are you saying technically the groups, like the actual groups, or are you talking about individual, like demographic groups, like class people?
I guess graphic groups. My example was the anti-vaxxers, and obviously they do commodify that and gather it. But is there anyone who is too small or too nutso, like the political price would be too high to pay, or do they really kind of think of themselves as kind of invincible and they're just going to go after? And also, I don't want to use the word rapacious because it obviously has negative connotations, but are they just so capitalistic, for lack of a foreign word, that they're just going to go after every click and eyeball and sell every bit of data, no matter how atrocious it might be to someone.
So I think Facebook is even more interested in what you consider small niche groups, because those are the groups that spend the most time on Facebook. Like if you are a community of people who like to ride horses while blowing bubbles and only vote for progressive candidates, right? You're very, very niche and specific, but that might make you really attractive to an advertiser. And they might know about you that if you belong to that group, you're really likely to recycle. So they're going to push you into a group of people who recycle. And maybe you believe in flat eartherism. And maybe, you know, like they send you down rabbit holes. And so knowing very nuanced, specific things about people is actually a lot of what they want. I've always been surprised at just how granular their data can be about people.
Yeah, so one of the things I will say about this is that for sheer scale reasons, most content is not monitored really. Most content or groups are not like monitored until they are reported in some capacity.
Exactly.
So that's not, so like I will say that like they might have identified them through algorithms as like high traffic, high eyeballs areas, as Sheera said, but like it's not like they're looking at some like 4-person group about like bubble horseback riding enthusiasts.
Yeah, so I meant that they were monitoring them in the sense of advertising and other groups to funnel them to. I didn't mean monitoring as in like the security team was watching what they were talking about.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Again,
yes.
this is the question.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yes, totally. So, but I do think that there is kind of like, I don't know. I have ooh, look, it's your book.
Thank you.
Hi, David.
Matched so good, I could not avoid the temptation.
It matched so good. Yeah, it's pretty good. There you
Oh,
go.
there's Loki.
Oh, hi, there I am. So I've got something for you too, GD.
I'll make you big. Hold on.
GDF, you've got yours, and Kate.
There's Loki. Oh, and there's mine. Thank you.
A little something for everybody,
Thank you,
including
David.
our special guests. So, well, thank you. So great to see all of you. This is super interesting. In how many countries is Facebook literally considered the internet? And what are the practical implications of that? You know, for the fair citizenry of Myanmar, whatever, but they're not the only ones, right? Where Facebook is for all practical purposes the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't give you a count, but there's a lot of countries where Facebook is the internet, where people use it interchangeably. I mean, when I went to Myanmar, I was really struck how, like, when I met a source or made arrangements, they handed me a card with their Facebook name on it. There was like no, and maybe a mobile number, cell phone number, but there was no email address, no other data. Like that was the way you found them, through their Facebook profile and a cell phone address. I think that it really shapes the way they experience the internet, because it's not the way a lot of us, or at least I'm going to speak for myself here, I'm in my late 30s. And so, that idea of getting online and Google search and finding niche communities online, like that happens very differently if you're being introduced to the internet through Facebook and through your family and friends. And you almost immediately seem to fall within these very specific groups, into these very, really specific echo chambers on Facebook. Again, it's one of those things that I would love to see an academic study on, because
there's like a bunch of stuff on this.
Send to me. I've recently been a little bit obsessed with this. A friend in Southeast Asia was just telling me about some other countries there that I should be looking at.
Philippines, like over there, a lot of countries. Like free basics, basically, like the partnership.
Free basics and zero rating.
Right.
That's what brought it all in. So basically, you got a phone. The first thing you saw was Facebook, and you did everything through Facebook. And so that was, and for all intents and purposes, that might have evolved in many places, but that was the first introduction for a lot of people in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and especially in all emerging markets.
Well, it also worked well. Like Facebook was ahead of the game in terms of creating a product that would work on bad internet, that would work on very, on poor cell phone, signals. I don't think we can underestimate that often I would speak to people who were using it because that was the one thing that seamlessly worked on their phones.
I mean, it's not any different than how AOL worked in the United States. Like,
Yeah,
AOL
so true.
literally was the same thing. It went through our telephone. It went through, I mean, it had the infrastructure of a telephone line, right? Which is a little bit different than like Mark Zuckerberg making like fucking Wi-Fi balloons and sending them all over the place, right? Like, okay, but like, but like, you know, but it's the same thing. The idea is indoctrination in one specific system. And like, if once you learn that you don't need to go into AOL to have an email address, or like you don't need to go into AOL to chat with your friends, then you stop going into AOL and they stop seeing your eyeballs, and that was like a huge drop off for them.
How innocent was AOL? I was thinking about this the other day because I think it was last year the world reached a point where more than 50% of the world came online. And that was a huge milestone, you know, for globally, you know, to get to a point where the world was not overwhelmingly white and male, which the world was in the early 90s, I think, at least when I came online. The internet was pretty much white dudes, right? Because that's who first got AOL, that's who first became really active in it. And so your experience coming online in the world today is so radically different than what a person experienced coming online, you know, 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, in the United States.
Yeah.
Everywhere, really, because, you know, these people that are coming online in other countries, their experience, I mean, I'm working on a vaccine story right now about how vaccine misinformation is being translated into dozens of languages and how people all over the world are being inundated with really sophisticated anti-vaccine messaging that was developed here in the United States. And so we're exporting some of the worst of our misinformation, some of the worst of the tactics into parts of the world that are really just starting to come online.
I think
AOL
that's...
didn't have a news feed. AOL didn't have a news
That's
feed.
so true. It had that shitty...
Yes.
It had that
it was
crappy...
Like a board, like a forum, or like, I don't even, I don't...
It had,
but this is so... People in chat are like, I'm still on AOL.
Yeah, we have I don't know. I'll never forget, like, 10 years ago, I met somebody with a Hotmail address, and I was like, never talk to me again. And that was 10 years ago, so, like,
Hotmail is still alive and well.
I know, it's kind of crazy. This has been an amazing discussion. I pinged someone to come in. I pinged Ev to come in and ask her a question, but she hasn't shown up yet. So I'm going to ask somebody else that asked to have their question read in the comments. Somebody asked, could you please give an update on Joel Kaplan's role at Facebook? And so... I am also, and that I'm picking that because I'm also interested. Can you please give me an update on Joel Kaplan's role at Facebook?
Yeah, his job is secure. He is incredibly important to the operation, especially as regulation and politics has become so much more important to Facebook. He's the global vice president of public policy, public affairs, the public policy. And he still lives in Washington, and technically he doesn't oversee the day-to-day stuff in Washington, but the important thing to take away from him is that Mark trusts him. Mark trusts him implicitly, and he also has Sheryl Sandberg's trust. So he does have very good political instincts if your whole approach to politics is to not piss anyone off who might hurt your business model. So that was essentially, I mean, and people who follow Washington, like Kate does and other people, like, they know this, like, that's what lobbying is. Lobbying is essentially to protect your business, right? And so he comes in and says, like, don't piss off Republicans, don't piss off Democrats, Trump's in power, don't piss off Republicans. And Congress has a Republican majority. People in Menlo Park thought that was incredibly cynical. They're like, okay, we need some, like, bright lines, like, don't cross the line and let people, like, political leaders, like our former president, break our other rules for everyone else on the platform, but let him stay on. So that's where a lot of, actually in our book, where a lot of the suspense is like some of this tension between Washington and Menlo Park culturally, the decisions that, are made that are emanating from Washington that Mark's adopting, how in many ways Trump is essentially like surfacing so many of the embedded problems. I mean, like, what we really hope that people take away from this book, and we think is, like, people are still obsessed with Trump, actually. Like, there's 3 books out in the next couple weeks that are on Trump. They're, like, selling like gangbusters, just doing so well, which is great. Like, people are really interested in understanding Trump. But what we do is we try to, like, explain how Trump was enabled by Facebook in so many ways. And a lot of the ways that he used Facebook were were like made possible because of the technology in the business, and and I think that's sort of a big takeaway. So my point with Joel, going back to Joel, is that he's incredibly powerful, and his job is not at all threatened. And he still is very controversial, but he's willing to take the heat. Like, one thing I know about Joel is that he sees himself as like kind of in combat, like he was, like he's bunkering down for this.
Yeah. Wait, I just was reminded by Ben in a text that I should tell you the funny story about how our In Lieu of Fun page was taken down by a QAnon, a net on a QAnon, a content moderation net on, and then like, I like texted my contacts at Facebook and it was like back up like that. And I was like, God, this is such bullshit how this system works. But like, Ben had stupidly hashtag something with a QAnon tag because he wanted to get the QAnon people to come to like troll us on our own show, which is a great idea. And like, when is that ever blown up in anyone's face? And then so he did that, and then anyways, the entire page got shut down. And we had to get it, and his account and like one other like innocent person's account got banned, and I had to get all of them restored. So
oh my god!
Yeah, but anyways, it's
learning.
It is not. This is, as you said, it's ad hoc. Ad hoc is how it works. It's ad hoc still, even today. So.
All right. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Right. Everybody in the chat, please go check out An Ugly Truth inside Facebook's Battle for Domination. I can do another link, but this link
got it.
Okay, good. It would fund more.
If you live in the Bay Area, I will give you one of my multiple copies, which is, if you notice, my husband never names them on the top of my shelf.
I actually was thinking you guys have cute little matchy like bookcases. Did you plan that?
No, we did not. We just at this point. Cecilia and I have basically been in constant touch for 2 years.
Oh my god,
we share
mine right now. We're like, she's my Middle East sister. I'm her Korean sister. Let me just tell you. Speaking of books, Sheera, I want to show you what my dad just sent me. Can you see this?
Oh my god!
I love it.
That's how you got on the New York Times bestseller list. Your dad!
What the fuck? My parents ordered 2 books and they were like, Sheera, they were $20 each. We ordered 2. I was just like,
I'm just telling you, my dad said he's filling the trunk on Sunday and bringing them all to church. I
love it.
That's amazing. That's too cute. That's super, super cute. That's awesome. Really great. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you guys so much. We will be back, what is it? The 23 hours from now.
Exactly. With Dwayne Betts, I believe, tomorrow, right?
Dwayne Betts, and that'll be great. Thank you guys so much for coming on. We don't have fun anymore.
It was so fun.
But in lieu of fun, we have an ugly truth and some not so ugly truth, and then we have Cecilia's dad's really adorable collection.
I love it.